In the closing days of World War II, the United States made a momentous decision that reshaped global history. The pivotal moments of August 6 and 9, 1945, witnessed the deployment of 2 atomic bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan, inflicting unprecedented devastation with far-reaching consequences. This was a turning point in our world's history, not just because it gave America and other nuclear weapon-bearing countries a vast military advantage, but also changing the fundamental laws of war and battle in the process. Residents of the small island country know that an unimaginable horror was about to befall them. The Enola Gay, a US B-29 bomber, dropped the first atomic bomb to ever be used in combat, instantly leveling the city. 3 days later, Nagasaki suffered a similar fate. The destructive power of these bombs was beyond comprehension. But wait, to truly appreciate the amount of planning these attacks had garnered, we need to go back to the very beginning, in December 1938. Where Otto Hahn and his colleague Fritz Strassmann discovered nuclear fission, a process that could quickly create large amounts of explosive force using the radioactive material uranium. A few months later, German geniuses Albert Einstein and Leo Szilard wrote an urgent letter to President Harry Truman, warning him of the possibility of a German superweapon. Truman, frightened by the news, began a superweapon project of his own, the Manhattan Project. Spanning 3 years, renowned scientists from around the world came to America to build this weapon capable of mass destruction and maybe capable of ending the world. Einstein and Oppenheimer may have been the largest faces of Project Manhattan, but they were by far not the only ones. Around 130,000 workers were employed to create the nuclear bombs. Some significant names include Enrico Fermi, Klaus Fuchs, and Leo Szilard. They were all key players in the nuclear race.
We knew the world would not be the same.
This is J. Robert Oppenheimer, one of the leading scientists of the Manhattan Project, giving arguably his most famous quote, "Now I'm become death, destroyer of worlds." He's talking about the first man-made nuclear explosion ever created, located at Jornada del Muerto, named the Trinity Test. Oppenheimer does not know how terribly true his words will ring.
Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
The 2 bombs, codenamed Fat Man and Little Boy, dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, were highly complex in their build. Fat Man, which was dropped on Nagasaki, was the more complex of the 2. A bulbous 10-foot bomb containing a sphere of the metal plutonium. It was surrounded by blocks of high explosives that were designed to produce an accurate symmetrical implosion. This would squeeze the plutonium sphere to a critical density and set off a nuclear fusion. 2 particles compressed together so hard their nuclei fuse. Scientists at Los Alamos were not entirely confident in the plutonium bomb design, so they scheduled the Trinity test. The Little Boy bomb type dropped on Hiroshima had a much simpler design than the Fat Man model. Little Boy triggered a nuclear explosion rather than an implosion by firing one piece of uranium into the other. When enough uranium is brought together, the resulting fission chain reaction can produce a nuclear explosion. To prevent inefficient pre-detonation, the uranium bomb is essentially a cannon with a uranium cannonball to as quickly as possible hit the payload. The uranium is shoved down a gun barrel into a perfectly fitting uranium crevice. The bomb's gun barrel shape was believed to be unquestionably reliable and has never been tested. In fact, testing was out of the question, since producing Little Boy had used all of the purified uranium-235 produced to date. Therefore, no other bomb like it has ever been built. The Trinity test was the first man-made nuclear explosion ever created. A test of the nuclear implosion method, and dubbed the gadget, the bomb was a mess of wires, electrical outputs, and steel plating. But when it exploded, the flash lit up the entire sky for a fraction of a second, and the sound almost deafened some of the workers. Sadly, this test was not without its consequences. Many people downwind of Trinity, living in New Mexico, received the brunt of the radioactive fallout and became the first brutal victims of the atomic bomb. When the fated day of the bombing came, almost everything was working against the bomber's favor. Under bad weather conditions and with static electricity threatening to detonate the bomb prematurely, the bombers flew with one unable to access reserve fuel, and the other missing the initial target, the city of Kokura, completely due to the fog and clouds obscuring it. Still, with nothing to lose, both bombs were dropped, one on August 6 and one on August 9, 1945. Those two bombs changed the world. The thermal pulse had a radius of 500 kilometers. The fireball was over 2 kilometers in diameter. The shockwave was 175 kilometers. The death count is estimated at 210 to 225,000. Around the world, people celebrated. But around the world, people wept. After the bombing, the Emperor of Japan surrendered almost immediately, preventing any more suffering for his people. The Second World War was over. Nagasaki had fared better than Hiroshima, as Hiroshima was a perfectly flat plain and Nagasaki's hilly terrain absorbed the bomb better. Nevertheless, the devastation was complete and ultimate. As each country finally began to take notice, the enormous war debts each had accumulated, and as treaties were written and agreements reached, Truman realized how advantageous nuclear bombs were. The Soviet Union had annexed and also seen the potential in the weapon. The Cold War's prologue had already begun. The bomb was a turning point in history, not just militarily, but also politically and morally. As the world enters the nuclear age, the balance of power has shifted. This sets the stage for the Cold War, a geopolitical struggle that defines the latter half of the 20th century. The fear of destruction looms large, casting a dark shadow over the international relationships. Battles are stopped over their threat, and battles are started for their possession. Some notable global events involving nuclear weapons include the arms race, with the development of the ICBM, aka Intercontinental Ballistic Missile, and the Cuban Missile Crisis. The deployment of 2 atomic bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan during the closing days of World War II marked a momentous decision made by the United States that would reshape global history. The pivotal moments of August 6 and 9, 1945 inflicted unprecedented devastation with far-reaching consequences. This event became a turning point in our world's history, not only granting America and other nuclear weapon-bearing countries a vast military advantage, but also fundamentally altering the laws of war and battle. As dust settled from the mushroom clouds, the world entered a new era defined by the power and peril of nuclear capabilities.